Today we have Kate Farmer, who is a Master's of Linguistics alumna. She graduated in 2014, right, Kate?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. But you also graduated with your undergraduate degree here,
I
correct?
did, yes, in 2010. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So you were here a while.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And currently she's the director of natural language processing, right? Voice of customer and medical unmet needs. That's a very long title.
It is.
And today, our event is being co-sponsored by the Student Linguistic Association of North Texas. If you are interested in linguistics, we really hope that you'll join them. They're one of our UNT student orgs, and you can find them through the, what's it called? Org Sync. Is that right, Libby?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And today's topic is leveraging linguistic and data analysis to create a career in natural language processing. I hope that's a good title, Kate. I hope that's what you're actually doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, totally.
Great. So first, let me introduce our guest. As I said, her name is Kate Farmer. She's the director of NLP Voice of Customer and Medical Unmet Needs at GSK. And that's GlaxoSmithKline. Is that correct? Pharmaceutical company, but they don't go by
That's
that whole
correct.
name.
Yeah, that's correct. Similar to how KFC is just KFC now, not Kentucky Fried Chicken. GSK is just GSK, but it came from many mergers ago, GlaxoSmithKline.
Okay, great. That's a really good way to think about it. I won't forget. They're a pharmaceutical company, and Kate is a linguist, a data scientist, and an AI researcher. Lots of skills there, with skills in machine learning and natural language processing. Her passions include domain-specific language modeling, ethical and transparent AI, and human cognition. So let's all welcome Kate. Welcome to the Code Series, Kate.
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
You're welcome. We're so happy you're here. It's 4 o'clock where you are, correct?
It is, yeah.
And did you just finish work or?
Well, I'm in one of these places where I sort of get here when I get here and I leave when I leave, so I'll probably be here for a little while longer, but the office is starting to clear out.
Okay, well, great.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here. And then today we have an interviewer. She's actually a former student. So you just graduated in the spring. Is that right, Libby?
Yes.
Okay. And also a linguist with a master's in linguistics. And you did the computational linguistics track, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So her full name is Elizabeth Brown, but we call her Libby, is a recent graduate of the Master's in Computational Linguistics program. She continues to participate in research projects with the UNT Computational Linguistics Lab. And your current title is Visiting Scholar, correct?
Yes.
All right. And she looks forward to starting her career in the in industry. She plans on pursuing her PhD, working on automatic translation and multilingual embedding spaces. So welcome to the Code Series, Libby.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
You're welcome. All right. So I'm going to put my view on speaker view so that it's like we're sitting watching two people having a conversation on a couch or like a tennis match, maybe. And I'm going to hand it over to Libby to start the questioning. As you hear Kate say stuff that you want to know more about, go ahead and drop questions in the chat. We will get to them the last 15 to 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes of the event. I'll be sure to bring those questions up. You ready to get started?
Yeah.
Okay, take it away.
Perfect. Okay, I'm so glad that you're here and that we can get to speak to you today. So let's see. Okay, so my first question for you today is, so you have this impressive title. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that title means? What do you do? Just give me a little more.
Yeah, that big word salad that we just heard. Yeah. So the title is, I think, in its entirety, Director of Natural Language Processing, Voice of Customer, Medical Unmet Needs Data Reporting and Analytics, which is so long. And I almost never use it. In fact, most of the time when I have to write it onto forms, even here at work, it like caps out with the number of characters I can type. But basically what it means is, yeah, as Lisa mentioned, so I work in the pharma industry, and what the team I work with is called medical analytics. And so pharma companies have lots of different parts. We're a really big company, lots of things going on. But the medical affairs group is basically there to try to say, hey, there's a lot of science that goes on into developing these drugs. And even people who are out there practicing don't always understand all that science. And so they're trying to educate on it. But there are lots of different things that people may need to be educated about. They may have questions about very, very niche aspects of the sort of development of the product, or they may have things more generally around like, hey, how do I actually like literally store this in my fridge? And so part of my job and what my team does is try to sort through all the information that we have from hearing from doctors and pharmacists and nurse practitioners and everybody to think about what are the biggest challenges that those people need to help them meet the actual medical needs of patients, and how can we help meet them better. So that's kind of what our team does, and that's what that big whole title means.
Awesome. That is super interesting. And so on your LinkedIn page, you have a kind of a title of inclusive leader and ethical technologist. So can you give us more information about why that's important to you and what exactly that means to you?
Yeah, and it's funny, when I saw this question in your notes, I was like debating whether or not I should be like, oh, let's get rid of that, because I go back and forth. On some days, I'm like, oh, I love this. I'm so proud of how I wrote this. And on other days, I just absolutely cringe when I look at it. So I keep it there because it does say some things that matter to me. First is, I've been working in this industry for, I guess, 10 years now, which doesn't feel right. I still feel like a recent grad, but I guess that's not true. And I am now in like leadership and management. And so it's important to me to talk about that. I don't take roles where I am expecting to be like hands-on in code day to day. I'm taking roles where I'm helping people solve problems, and I'm really thinking about the people aspect. And the kind of manager and leader I am is somebody that really cares about people and very people first. So that's the inclusive leader part. And then ethical technologist, frankly, is a way of kind of dog signaling to people that I'm going to be real annoying to you. I'm going to be the one in the room going, have you thought about the way that your data might be biased? Have you considered whether or not this is really matching your user group compared to how this is and how that is? And have you considered the impacts of this? And I get kind of obnoxious about it. And I need you to know that going in, if you're going to work with me, that I am not going to be the one that like goes, it's probably fine. Like, I'm going to be annoying about making sure we're doing the right thing, keeping our data um, accurate, inclusive, diverse, private, and all of those things. So
Mhm.
that's why I have those things there.
Awesome. Always very important things to keep in mind. And so that's very cool. So let's go back to the very beginning.
Hmm.
So you studied linguistics for
I
basically
did.
7 years in undergraduate, grad school. And so let's talk about what attracted you to spend so much time studying linguistics, and which areas of linguistics were you most passionate about then? And then how does that compare to now?
Yeah, well, it's actually interesting because at first I was like, yeah, 7 years, totally. And then actually I thought about it, and it's not entirely right. I did get my undergrad in linguistics. I spent 4 years getting my undergrad, and then I spent almost 4 years getting my master's degree because I was also working full time. But I actually didn't start studying linguistics until basically my senior year of my undergrad. I did a number of other things first. I actually started at UNT as an art major. That's what brought me to the school, was the communication design program. But turns out you have to be able to actually do art, and I couldn't. I was a very, very bad artist, so I left that. And I did a few different things. I was interested in psychology. I was interested in anthropology and sociology and English literature. And so I was an English lit major. And you all don't know this, but when I was there, there was not actually a linguistics major in and of itself, even when I was an undergrad. My degree that hangs up on my wall says that I have a bachelor's degree in English with a concentration in linguistics. So, because I was an English major, we were required to take at least one course from every other concentration. So, I was English lit, but I had to take a course in creative writing. I had to take a course in, um, gosh, I don't remember. Oh, like teaching, and then I had to take a course in linguistics. And I put off linguistics for a really long time because I hated grammar in high school and middle school. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I have to sit here for a whole semester talking about what a gerund is, I'm going to absolutely lose it. So I took the class and I was like, all right, whatever. And the very first day, I remember, I actually don't remember her name, who the instructor was. She was not there for very long. She was an instructor, not full time staff.
Hmm.
But she just basically had us sit down and talked about, like, hey, do you actually know why you say the things you say? And do you know how you make the sounds you make? And like, even starting out in phonology and having these like 30 some odd college students in a room all sitting there, like sitting there going like, t, t, b. and like practicing those sounds that we all do when we see the IPA chart for the first time. It was just really cool, and realizing here's this really important thing that we all use that we don't actually understand, and that was really fascinating to me. So at the very end of my undergrad, I switched and changed my concentration and spent my whole senior year doing linguistics. I was really interested in sociolinguistics because of the sociology and anthropology stuff I was already doing. And so that was something I was interested in. But given that, like, the thing that excited me the most was this question of here's a thing we do that we don't actually understand, it really drew me into like the cognitive linguistics research that we didn't have tons of at UNT, but I was like so excited to learn about it, which is what I spent more time focusing on in my grad program, and how that sort of combined with computational linguistics and modeling and all sorts of stuff. And this was, I think, the year that Siri came out. So, like, that was very exciting. Um, yeah, so it just kind of happened by chance a little bit. And it was funny because I realized, like, the next year that I was sitting in class, like, really excited to talk about gerunds. So, kind of took me by surprise.
How it goes sometimes, like, sometimes it just hits you and you're like, "Oh my gosh." I totally
Yeah, I was
understand.
diagramming sentences in like dry erase marker on the mirror of my
Mhm.
college apartment, and I was like, "This is not where I thought I was going to be." But here we are.
Yeah, you never really expect to end up there, but then you're really happy when you are, and you're like, "Dang it."
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, we all kind of fall into what we're interested in sometimes, and you just kind of never expect it. But so something else that you did was when you were at UNT, you were in the Human Intelligence and Language Technology Lab. And
Yeah.
so can you talk more about that experience and kind of how it
Yeah.
helped you move in the direction you did after graduating?
Yeah. So like I was saying just a minute ago, like there was not the year after I graduated was the year that an English degree, or excuse me, a linguistics degree came into existence at UNT, or maybe the year before. Anyway, it was very close to around when I graduated. But even at that point, there was no computational linguistics program or anything along those lines. But it was really interesting to me. Like I said, Siri was all new and exciting, and um, I was really interested in that. I wanted to think about how I could take these cool things I was learning and actually like do something with them. And so I started seeking out and trying to learn about computational linguistics and sort of trying to forge that path for myself. So I found out about this lab that was in the computer science department. It was the Human Intelligence Language Technology Lab run by Dr. Nielsen. And reached out to him and was basically like, "Hey, could you use a linguistics grad student in your lab right now? Could you be an advisor? Could work with me?" And he graciously agreed to do so. And that was, I think, really lucky for me because that was where I got to start really seeing what that looks like, not just reading about it in articles or like watching YouTube videos around it, like actually getting to see what it looked like to do that work, which was super cool. I was in that lab basically functioning as like a lead annotator, right? So um, the project that I was working on was called the Companion Bot project. So he had a grant that was basically trying to work on developing a sort of a robotic assistant that would help bridge the gap between people who couldn't really quite totally live independently, but also really did not want to be in assisted living. So focusing on elder care, especially, and really the rise and huge impact of like depression and mental health problems in that population. So the idea was, what if we had just a little bot that could have conversation, help monitor for mental health, help remind them to do positive behaviors like take their meds, go out for a walk if they're able to do so, right? Things like that. Well, that meant that we had to code a lot of stuff because we had to be able to look for things like resistance to health behavior change and what the person's personal interests were, their family relationships, all that stuff needed to be recorded into some sort of information model. So it was a lot, and I spent most of my time there trying to figure out even what was the right like information structure to use for that kind of of detail and then create the data that would let our computer science grad students actually like automate and model for it.
Mhm.
It was I, by the time I left, they I think were still very deep in the weeds on it, and I haven't really followed the project, so I don't know where it went from there. But it was super interesting.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Very important research that I think, will definitely have a huge impact, even if you're not following it, that definitely important, which is super cool. And then after that, you went on to UC Boulder and were was a
Yeah.
research assistant with the Institute of Cognitive Science. So what did you do? What did you learn from that experience?
Honestly, the most important thing I learned was that academia wasn't the life for me, which I think is important to know, especially early on, right, to make those kinds of choices. But
Mhm.
I was really, really interested in the work they were doing there, and I still am. It's absolutely fascinating. They were doing some really great work around EEG studies. So I was working as part of the lab there. I would go and help actually place the, nodes on people's heads and scalps and position them to do the experiments, worked around experimental design and some data analysis of the readouts. And it was really cool. We were looking at things like reactions to garden path sentences and whether or not the brain responded in the way that we would expect it to respond, given like either syntactic or semantic
Hmm.
breakdowns, basically.
Interesting.
Um, so it was really, really cool. But I was working right alongside people who were PhD students, doctoral students, and I just saw like their determination, their grit, their tenacity, and realized I don't have that. I wanted to be able to plan my life more than 6 months in advance, and I wanted a level of um, stability and predictability to things. And they very, very graciously said to me, you know what? I don't know if this is what you think it is, and it gave me a really good insight into like what are the realities of different paths I could go down and help me sort of figure out which one was actually right for me versus which one I wanted to be right for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think you always kind of have to have that discussion with yourself and those experiences that kind of tell you what is right for you and where you kind of need to focus going forward. So that's awesome. So
And
then
I
you,
admire that so much, by the way. It's not to disparage academia, right? Like
no,
I
no,
think
of
there's
course.
really, really great stuff going on and like I still wish I was that kind of person, right?
Yeah, of
But I
course.
think that's part of the learning is figuring out, are you the person who will thrive in that or are you not? Because I know plenty of
Yeah.
people also who would completely not thrive in the kind of environment I'm in now, but it works for me, right? So it's just,
Yeah.
you know, different things work for different people.
Yep. And I think we always have this image of ourselves and kind of being able to match that with the reality that we can make kind of going forward is always important because
Yeah,
if you know that something is not going to work for you personality wise or what your goals are, then obviously that is just everyone will be miserable in the process. So
right.
never good. But so you moved on to industry after that. So
I did.
you moved on to LexisNexis as a computational
Yes.
linguist and then a
Yeah.
lead data scientist. So how did you get that first role? Then how did you move on to the data scientist role? So how did all of that come about?
Yeah. So and you'll hear me say this a lot probably as we talk, I got really lucky. So I had had this realization. I had applied to actually be a part of the PhD program formally, and they couldn't have a spot for me. And I was kind of like, done, right? So I went out and I looked for, I think it was, Indeed.com and, linguistics search. What do I get? And I had no idea actually what I was going to find. I was expecting to maybe see some stuff around like automatic translation or something along those lines, but I ended up finding this really perfect fit at LexisNexis. And so LexisNexis is a legal research company. They're actually one of the biggest in the legal
Yeah.
fields and
Mhm.
have been around for decades. They officially, technically, were the very first search engine. They own the patent for it, and there's old terminals you can see if you go to the office in Dayton that are like the very, very first intranet search engine terminals. It's really cool.
That's awesome.
Um, but what this was in 2016, and so they were in a place where a lot of new lawyers coming into the to the field were not really wanting to use products like theirs anymore because they could just Google everything, right? Which is a business problem because you, you lose customers and you lose profit, but it's also a slightly legal problem because people are getting information that may or may not be actually the right best law in their particular jurisdiction or whatever, right? It could be have been overturned and they're not able to track that, and so they're going to court with, really kind of bad case law. So what we wanted to do, or what LexisNexis wanted to do, and what I got brought in for, is try to bring the things that people liked about Google into that platform, right? So given that they were the very first search engine, you guys may or may not know this, maybe some of our library science students have gone through the exercise of like learning how to do complex Boolean search queries, right? Of like this and this within 5 of that, but not this, and like these really, really long things. Well, there are whole classes on that when you go to law school because of platforms like LexisNexis. But new law students didn't want to do it. And so we were working on developing natural language search for law and question answering so that a lawyer or legal researcher, paralegal, whatever, could, go into the search box and just type, what are the elements of fraud in North Carolina, and actually just get an answer that cited to case law that they could just move forward with. So that's what I got brought on to do. And it turned out that my experience with linguistics in particular was really important to them. A lot of people at that time in industry were doing this kind of work, but were mostly hiring computer science students and computer engineers to then think about language and linguistics. But because the law is so complicated and the legal language is so complicated, they had tried that and they had failed. And so they were actually seeking people who could think about complex language structures. And that's kind of how I connected with them and was able to get that role. And yeah, we did a lot there around trying to map out the different syntax structures and rules and this, but not this. And then you can parse this out. And we had 3-page long regex expressions that we were writing and maintaining that were absolute nightmares. But it was really interesting. And that, I think, more than anything else, kind of defined where I would go in my career and what it's turned into since then, because I really got to see the idea of all these like technologies and things being used, applied to a purpose, right? And thinking about, okay, is it good enough, right? Does it meet the actual needs that our customers have or that we have for this product? And sometimes it would be like, hey, it doesn't meet our standards as data scientists. We're looking at it and going, oh, I see all these problems, but it's good enough for the user. And sometimes the reverse. Sometimes we would say, hey, it's like 98% accurate. You're never going to get better than that. And they would go, yeah, but our customers need 100, right? Or they need whatever. And so like really interesting problems to think about in terms of the human element in these interactions, which was really cool. So you asked about then going to be a lead data scientist, which, after I was there for a year or two, I got promoted to be a lead, which was interesting and hard because the title was lead data scientist, but I was also not only leading computational linguistics people like myself, but data scientists who were more traditional data science, also software engineers and like web designers and things that I knew absolutely nothing about, and had to really learn what it meant to lead a team and coach people when they know more than I do, right? And lean into the fact that I don't need to understand it in order to help people get unstuck in their own problems. And that's been, I guess, kind of the theme of what gets me excited now since then is I still love the work I do. I love working with language data and these kinds of problems, but I also work with people who know all sorts of things that I don't know. And I haven't been hands-on in a while. And so I still think about regular 10-page regular expressions, and that's not the world that people are doing anymore. And I think it's important to recognize that I can think about the problems and think about the people and advise on that, even if I'm not the person who knows the most in the room.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So after LexisNexis, then, and before you got to GSK, you
Yeah,
worked at a few different startup companies.
I did.
So
Yeah.
how did that prepare you? What were you doing there? And then kind of how did that take you on your journey to GSK?
So I had been at LexisNexis for a few years, and I really loved the team I was working with. I thought it was great, but it was my first like job outside of academia, and I was getting a lot of frustration around the corporateness of it all, right? The having to go to quarterly planning meetings and discuss our OKRs and our KPIs. And I was just like, oh my God, please stop. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be sitting here thinking about whether or not the VP of regional whatever likes the demo we did. And so I was like, you know what? It's just because the company's too big. I'm going to go to some small companies and see what things are like there because I think that'll suit me better. And in some ways it did. I didn't have to think as much about what the VP of regional whatever cared about things, right? It was just me and the founder and, a handful of other people making quick decisions, doing things, really fast. We were at LexisNexis, it took probably we really patted ourselves on the back and congratulated ourselves a lot if we went from idea to feature release within 4 to 6 months, right? And
Mhm.
in the startup worlds, that was 4 to 6 days. And you had people going come on, where is this? We're waiting for it. So seeing things happen quickly was really cool, and seeing how we could directly go from idea to real thing was amazing and really,
Mhm.
really fascinating. But um definitely had its challenges too. I Well, first off, I had at that point I had had a son who was about 2 years old, and I pregnant with and then had my second child, my daughter, who's now 3, so she was an infant, and trying to support the needs of that kind of very demanding startup. Things that are young are very demanding. Babies are very demanding, and startups are very demanding. They need a
Yeah.
lot from you. And I learned that, similar to academia, I like things that are going to be a little bit more stable and are going to give me a little bit more freedom to walk away at the end of the day. And that's something that startups really couldn't offer me. Um, and so that was one of the reasons that I ended up leaving and, coming to GSK. But I think it did help me see that sometimes the things that in big companies, in big organizations, we think are just true, oh, well, you can't just make a decision. You have to talk to 5 different people. And that's actually not true. We actually
Mhm.
can do things, right? And so it kind of gave me is kind of like a boot camp, right? Of okay, here's what it could look like if things were dramatically different.
Yeah.
Now let's take the good parts of that and leave aside what doesn't make sense?
Mhm. That makes sense. I mean, yeah, those are all important things and kind of exact like when you realize academia wasn't for you, you have to have these learning experiences. You're like, okay, this works for me, this doesn't. Here's how I can kind of fit that into my own life. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. And so now you've made it to GSK.
Now
We've
I'm
gone
here.
through your entire journey here.
Yeah.
And in your role now,
Mhm.
how do you leverage your linguistics background since that's kind of where you started? How do you
Mhm.
leverage that and how does that enhance the work that you do?
It's actually, I think it's really interesting because if you had asked me this a year ago, I would have had a very different answer. A year
Mhm.
ago, I would have said, well, I don't really talk about my linguistics background that much. It was sort of informative to how I think about the problems, but it's not really part of my day to day life. That is dramatically not true anymore, for predictable reasons, maybe. But with everyone getting so hyped and so excited about ChatGPT and generative
Yeah.
AI, I am talking to lots and lots and lots of people about like linguistic theory, actually, quite a bit. Because the thing that people, I think, know about generative AI is that it can do cool stuff. And they also know that there's concerns and privacy issues, right, with the data and the model. But what
Mhm.
business leaders don't necessarily know and are not necessarily prepared for
Mhm.
are, what will it look like when this model is wrong? Because it doesn't get things wrong the way that people get things wrong,
Mhm.
because it doesn't represent language the way that people represent language. It doesn't represent information the way that people represent information. And so
Mhm.
actually spend a lot of time talking to people about, hey, you can train a person in this way and expect them to have this outcome, and you can sort of know what will happen if you're expecting things to work this way. And this
Yeah.
model is so convincingly human so many times that you think it's going to be the same way, but it's not. It's actually going to be this dramatically different thing. And you need to think about that, and sort of helping them understand how that works, why that works is something I spend a lot of time on.
Yeah, very important questions that I think maybe a lot of people aren't thinking about, but that I think are very important. Kind of how we move forward with these large language models going forward.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think it's just to pick on that a little bit, like
oh,
a
yeah.
lot of people think that the biggest barriers to working with large language models and generative AI are technical. They're not. They're cultural. They're organizational. They're understanding how do we as people prepare to interact there.
Mhm.
And that's why this is such an important thing for me, is to help people understand their role to play, right? It's not
Yeah.
the moment of just waiting for the model to catch up, right? It's
Mhm.
the model has already caught up. You just don't realize it yet, or you don't know what to do with it now that it's here, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Trying to make sure everyone's expectations kind of match and kind of understand where everyone fits in that equation is
Yes. Yeah.
always, yeah, that alignment is always difficult. So, as a trailblazer in the field of computational linguistics and as a woman in the tech field, what obstacles have you had to overcome as such?
Um, Not the ones I would have expected. I think uh early on when I sort of realized, oh my gosh, I'm a woman in tech, right? I thought that was gonna mean something. And that's not actually how it turned out. I didn't ever have the moments of, you know, the overt sexism or bigotry or anything along those lines. But I did find a few things that I think were really, really shaped by who I am and what that looks like. So some of it was kind of those things combined, right? I was not only a woman in tech, but I was coming from a background that was very different from a lot of people I worked with, right?
Mhm,
I don't, I think I know like one other person in my field right now who works with me regularly who like studied linguistics, right? Or anything that would be considered like a social science. Almost everybody I know comes from, hard sciences, typical
mhm,
STEM, computation, com- uh, computer science or mathematics or something like that. And
mhm,
so I brought a very different perspective to things.
mhm,
And for me, one of the big issues that I had to learn was I was very insecure about that. I felt like, oh, they all know all these things. They've been educated around all this stuff. I self taught Python. I'm really missing out. So they probably know all this stuff and I don't want to like butt in. I just want to learn from them.
mhm.
But as I kept going and, occasionally would speak up a little bit more, I realized that actually, yeah, I do certainly have things to learn, and that's 100% true. But
Mhm.
also, so do they. I know things that they don't know as well. And
Yeah.
learning to get comfortable with that, get comfortable knowing that the different background, different perspective I bring isn't a liability, but an asset, and how to use that, and how to not only help myself know that, but how to help others know that too,
Mhm.
has been a continued, honestly, growth for me, even still.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely always it's like when you feel like you're maybe lacking in one area, but trying to find out where your strengths are in comparison is always, I think, kind of difficult. But it's,
hmm
part of figuring out where you fit. And so let's see. We've kind of touched on this, but maybe we can just talk about it a little bit more. But you talk about that you have a different background going into kind of a more tech field.
hmm
And so now we're kind of in this world where it's very full of people working in AI and NLP and machine learning and data science. And
hmm
where do computational linguists fit in this kind of big group of people? And what is it that computational linguists can offer, or like a perspective that they can provide that might differ from more like pure CS or data science
hmm
perspective?
Well, for one thing, I think that you're probably not going to find like job titles like mine that, I am a computational linguist. That's almost gone now at this point. In fact, it was almost gone when I had it. I was kind of a
Mhm,
remnant. So you're all going to have the same job, right? Everyone's going to come in and say, I'm a data scientist or I'm an NLP practitioner or whatever the title is. It's going to be something
mhm,
along those lines. And so people who have this kind of background are going to be in that same bucket as people who have the more um, comp sci background. And
Mhm.
so that's good and bad, right? Because the good of it is, hey, you're all here, you're all bringing the same, skill set fundamentally.
Mhm.
And so you can all contribute in the same way. And so that difference isn't as like obvious and apparent in every situation.
Mhm.
But I do think there's a lot to be gained, right? Because those same kinds of questions around how do we understand what this capability is doing. And I think the thing that, at least in my experience, I have been able to do a little bit better than some of my peers who do have a pure technical background is they are better than I am at predicting what the computer will do.
Mhm.
I am better than they are at predicting what the people will do, right? And so they can sometimes make a model that is higher performing by all of the sort of quantitative measures.
Mhm.
But sometimes I can make choices that leave it to be maybe less performant, but a better user experience, right?
Mhm.
Because I can sort of think about the ways that people are used to particular like variation in language, the kinds of things that we are accustomed to, the kinds of things
Mhm.
that we readily accept, and also the kinds of things that we really don't accept, to a pure sort of quantified perspective, those two errors are the same, right? And so we're just trying to reduce all the errors, and maybe we end up with one or the other, but we just want to get rid of as much as possible.
Mhm.
But I take a different approach to it. I think about how do I get rid of the kinds of errors that are going to make this feel unhelpful, right? Or feel inauthentic, right? And I've had a lot of experience thinking about those things. And so I can start to pull them out a little bit, right? Um, I also think that something I bring to this is really well suited for the kinds of fields I've gone into, right? I haven't gone into I don't work on Siri, right? I don't work on things that are sort of generalized NLP.
Mhm.
I work on these really domain specific things. And so
Mhm.
what that means is in the fields we're in, we spend a lot of time talking with people who are like experts in this field, right? When I was at LexisNexis, I talked to a lot of lawyers. Here I talk to a lot of medical doctors and pharmacists by training. And a lot of what we're trying to do as a data scientist or someone working in NLP is we're trying to figure out, okay, your brain can do this task. What is it that you're doing and how can I like codify that, right, into something repeatable? And so we have to learn how to like ask them the right kinds of questions to pull that information out.
Mhm.
And I pull a lot on the training I had in my graduate studies for that because I think about a bunch of things. I took a course in language documentation, wherein the whole semester we had a native speaker of Javanese sit in with us every class, and we would ask her questions. How do you say this? How do you say this? How do you say this? To try to ask her the right questions so that we could properly document her
Mhm.
language that she knew intuitively in her head. We did not ask her, how do you conjugate to be, right? We asked her, what's the word for mother? How would you say my mother likes soup, right? Like these things that feel weird and nonsensical, but we knew it would give us this key piece of information.
Mhm.
That is the same kind of thing that I do when I'm asking my, MDs and PharmDs, like, okay, you're looking at this and this tells you that people are having trouble vaccinating because they're not able to like store it properly. I don't see that information here. So tell me about what is it this does this talk about storage, right? I can ask them that like really detailed question to help
Mhm.
piece that out.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's really helpful and hard to learn.
Mhm.
And having that more social sciencey background, I think, is
Mhm.
able to make that a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, looking kind of over your career from the start to where you are now, how have your expectations for your job and for your career changed? And
Mhm.
how has that kind of corresponded to changes in the industry?
Um, oh man, I could answer this so many different ways. So, I mean, I talked a lot just in the last 30 minutes about how I've wanted to think about my own personal goals in my career and how that's led to different decisions I've made. Um, but I do think it's reflective of some things going on in the industry, right? Like when I started with this, there was a lot of newness. There was a lot of um, paths to be forged, right? I was figuring out how to work as a linguistics grad student and cross ties with a, comp sci lab. And I was um, going into, even at LexisNexis, like people didn't really know what it meant to be doing this kind of work. And so we
Mhm.
were not only having to do the work, but also like kind of sell it to other leaders and say, here's what we're doing, here's why this matters. Right. So there's a lot of like self advocacy
Mhm.
early on. And I don't get me wrong, I think that's important and always doing that. But it's become more and more routine, right? And so as I've kind of settled into knowing this is what I'm doing, this is what my career is about, it's
Mhm.
also easier for me to tell that story. Or not,
Mhm.
it's easier for me to tell it, and it's also easier for people to understand it. When I talk to people at, meeting my husband's friends over drinks or something, and they say, "Oh, what do you do?" And I say, "Oh, well, I work in AI and NLP." They go, "Oh, okay." Right?
Yeah.
Versus having
Mhm.
to like spend 30 minutes explaining what I do. Or what I used to do is people would look at me with a blank stare and
Mhm.
I go, I teach robots to talk. And they would go, oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
Right. So it's just become more integrated, I guess, and more expected.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know how much of that is my own experience because it mirrors my own path so well, but it's certainly what seems to be the case across the industry.
Mhm. Yeah. So, going off of what advice do you have for linguists who want to work in a similar field for you? And then on the flip side, maybe what advice do you have for students with a background maybe more on the technical side who want to improve maybe their linguistic skills or their NLP skills? So, kind of what advice would you have for kind of both sides of that?
Yeah, I think if you're someone who has the kind of background I had and you're interested in coming into this field, well, number one, you're probably better set up for it than I was because you probably have more support for that now than I did, which is fantastic and wonderful. And use those supports. But also, you're still probably going to feel the ways that you have gaps compared to some of your counterparts that are more techie, right? Because I mean, I don't know what the current comp sci program looks like, and I don't know what the comp ling program looks like, but my guess is that some things haven't changed. And computer science programs, a lot of it is skills and, technical things and like scientific concepts, but a lot of it's also like expectations, ways of working. You come out of school having learned what agile is. I never knew what that was. I had to learn about expectations for testing your code and working together. Like what does it mean that I have a project manager now? Like those were things I wasn't ever taught, and I'm guessing that that may or may not be something. Those kinds of like ways of working things
Mhm.
might be things that folks coming from more of the social sciences side will
Mhm.
find that they have to learn as they're adapting. It's okay. It's okay to not know that.
Mhm.
Recognize that these people know that because they were explicitly taught it as part of their grad programs. It's not a failing on your part that you don't know it, right? You just have to not be afraid to ask the dumb questions sometimes. And usually you'll find the answers easier than you think. On the flip side, I
Mhm.
would say to people who are, coming from the other side of this, people who are very computationally focused, maybe mathematics background,
Mhm.
statistics, pure data science, and they're really interested in applying that into an NLP context. I would say to give yourself a little bit of the theory, right? Don't be afraid to get a little theoretical, a little philosophical, right? Um, I don't expect them to do what I did, right? I spent an entire semester in a semantics class with Hadros, and like for 4 hours one night, we just talked about the definition of a chair. And I
Yeah.
don't think anybody probably wants to do that unless you're somebody who wanted to go to school for this. But
Mhm.
spending a little bit of time understanding like what does it actually mean to understand sentence structure, right? Like something I observed is that we would talk about concepts that sort of came out of the computational world that felt a little bit hand wavy to me, right? They'd say like, okay, well, are we going to do this for unigrams or bigrams or trigrams? And I would say, can't we just do noun phrases? Right? Like, why do we have to decide whether we're doing one word or two words?
Mhm.
We know what the structure is. Can't we just like use the structure of the sentence, right? Um, and it was funny because I had said that, and they were like, "Well, how would we do that?" And I showed them, here's a spacey, parser, and it'll show you the dependency tree, and here's how you get it. And it was great. It worked really well. And so they had been like agonizing over this decision of bigrams or trigrams for like a week. And we actually didn't even need to do it because if you had learned a little bit about the syntax, it sort
Mhm.
of solves itself, right? And
Mhm.
so I think being open to recognizing that some of those things can be helpful,
Mhm.
even if you don't necessarily know them, right? Just you don't know what to ask until you know about it. So spend the time, learn a little bit about it, and then you may find a time when it can come up and be helpful.
Mhm. That's awesome. So
Yes.
I think Lisa, you wanted to.
Yes. Well, we have several questions in the chat and we have about 14 minutes left. There's one student who'd like to unmic and ask a question, but before I get to that student, we do have our brand new chair of the Learning Technologies Department who will be starting in January. And Dr. Ge has a comment. She says that in the field of instructional design, right, which is a different field than what you're in, but we have something called cognitive task analysis, and we will ask questions to the domain experts to elicit their problem solving processes from them. It's a super helpful process and skill set. It takes practice to be really good at it. So do you want to make any comment on her comment?
Yeah, I wish I would have known that that was a very specific thing I could learn. I had to learn it in this roundabout way of doing language documentation. And I think that's really fascinating, and I think that shows the benefit of like having these different fields sort of in conversation with one another in the way that you have here, right? Because it shows the ways that these are actually really interconnected and really mutually beneficial. So I think that's awesome, and I'm gonna go Google that later. So
Great idea. Thank you for that comment, Dr. Gutt. And she's on a Fulbright in Canada right now, but she'll be joining us in the spring. And then Krishna, did you want to go ahead and turn on your camera and open your mic and ask your question directly? This is a data science student.
Yeah, I'm on it.
Uh-oh, we lost you. Did you?
Yeah, can you guys see me?
We can hear you. Yes, we can see you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for giving me this opportunity. This is Krishna, data science student of data science in masters. I'm in my first semester. So the question I pose is that as a beginner in data science, with the knowledge of with the background of computer science, what is expected from us to get into the field of NLP? Because it's changing rapidly. Like recently, before 2022 December, we don't have that much of large language models, etc. But people after releasing it, it changed the dynamics of that field a lot. So I just wanted to know how we have to approach and what we have to do in our masters to get updated so that we could ride the surface of the tide.
Yeah, that's a good question, Krishna. For me, I can tell you, so I'm now in a position, like I said, I lead teams and I do hiring, right? And so when I am looking for people to hire into my team, that are NLP focused roles, I get people from lots of different backgrounds. And when I see someone who is coming out of a master's degree in data science, what I will pay a lot of attention to is like, what kinds of projects have they been doing? Have they been thinking about these kinds of problems? I'm not actually as interested usually in the specific approaches because, like you say, it changes rapidly and it's going to continue to change rapidly, right? And so
Yeah.
I don't, I mean, it's great if you've worked with the specific, skill set and tools that the team is using. That's always a benefit, but it's almost impossible to know what any team is using before you get in. And so
Yeah.
what I care about more is seeing that someone has thought about these kinds of problems and that they've thought about them more than once. If you're coming to a team that's very NLP focused, I want to see that you've taken the time, given the choice to say, yeah, I've actually thought about sentiment analysis or topic clustering or these types of things numerous times, not just like, oh, one time I did a um, a case study for one course that looked at the IMDb data set of reviews, right? Like, that's cool, that's great. I don't want to undermine that, but if you're coming from that kind of more technical background, I want to see that this is a real interest for you and that something you're prepared to think deeply about, because you do have to think deeply, right? And so I want to have seen that someone's been open to doing that in the past.
Yeah, that's a good thing to know. But I just also wanted to know that, like, we are starting from the basics, like from getting to know about the pre-processing of data, then the modeling of the data, later getting into neural networks, from there NLPs, bag offers, etc., etc. And now it has changed to transformers and GPT, and now large language models. So it's difficult for us to cope up with that and cover all those topics. If I wanted to get into that particular job, then I have to go through all this. Like, today, if I complete a single research, then I don't know, maybe tomorrow I may miss another one. So how to deal with that?
Okay,
I-
and just before you answer, Kate, let's
Yeah.
Krishna, if you'll this will be your last question because we do have other questions to get to. So
Yeah,
go
that's
ahead and answer Kate, and then we'll go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you could talk all day with Kate, I bet. But
Probably
Yeah,
could.
that's good.
I tend to be long-winded, so I'll try not to be. I think that I'll challenge something you said there, Krishna. You said, we have to learn all these things. Actually, I don't think you do, because even if you learned every single one of those things, the moment you graduate, there's going to be something new coming again, right? So I don't care that you've learned every single thing. I care that you know how to learn something new, right? Because
Yeah.
if you've had to learn everything in your degree program, that's great. But then when the new thing comes out tomorrow, are you going to be able to help us evolve with it, right? And so that's
Yeah.
what I'm more interested in, is how you can teach yourself those new skills. And if you haven't had a chance to use it before, that's fine, right? But seeing adaptability, I guess, and sort of self-driven learning is key for me because of that exact reason.
Got it. Thank you.
excellent. Yeah, excellent. Thank you for your question, Krishna. We also have in the chat, Autumn asked a question. Autumn wants to know if you could start your educational journey over again, which sounds
Oh, God, no.
daunting. What skills would you focus on? Is there anything you would work towards or avoid with the knowledge you have now?
For the most part, I'm pretty happy with how things went. I think I am someone who likes to acquire lots of lots of little knowledges and collect them and apply them in different ways. So I'm actually happy with the sort of smattering of things I learned throughout my undergrad. The one thing that I would probably do differently is I talked a little bit about sort of my own self-doubt was a big problem for me, and I was really intimidated. I knew I was interested in this field, but I was so sure that I could never be somebody who worked in it, that I was I sort of self-selected out, and I was like, you know what, I can't do it. I guess I'll just get a teaching certificate instead. And that's not what I actually wanted to do. I don't actually want to be teaching high school English, but I felt that it was more achievable. And so I went down this path, and I wasted about a year actually doing that, and actually severely hurt myself in a lot of ways because I was so deeply uninterested that I didn't do the coursework and really had very poor GPA for a while. And one of the reasons I think struggled to have PhD programs later on. So I think I would have probably stayed focused on the thing I really wanted and spent less time trying to sort of prepare my backup plan. Because I think my doing that actually hurt plan A, right, in ways that I didn't realize was happening at the time.
Yeah, I can see that. You definitely have to not doubt yourself. Otherwise, you might make poor choices for yourself. But
Yeah, and I
how do
think
we
that
get over that?
yeah, well, and it's hard because it's again, I know lots of my husband was a teacher, and it's a really, really hard field, and it's one of those that you have to be excited about to do. And I had this misconception that oh, I can just do that, right? And so it led me into a place where I was sort of not really engaged, but it also took me away from the thing I wanted to be engaged with. So I guess that would be my advice is, when you know what it is you want to do, if you don't yet know what you want to do, by all means, do all the things, right? That's the great part about my undergrad experience. I got so much stuff from so many different places. But once you do know what you want to do, don't be afraid to focus on it. Because I think depth of expertise is a much greater indicator of success than having lots of different fallback options.
Okay, thank you. And Ross has a question. Ross asks, are language models more formulated on mathematical equations?
Computational language models usually are, at least nowadays. Used to be that they were very sort of logic-based, very rule-based. But now most language models that anyone really is using are extremely mathematical. In fact, when I talk to people about the differences in what's going on behind the scenes and why that changes what they expect, I actually, give them the example that it's all just math, right? Everything that's happening behind the scenes is figuring out ways to turn these words, phrases, and sentences into numbers that are doing calculations. And that's why ChatGPT can do some of the cool things it does, right? Is because once you have that deep, complex, highly dimensional representation of language in that way, and you've learned how to do math on it, you could do some crazy math with it, right? I have an example I give where I asked the, model to recite to or explain postmodern art theory to me as if you were Bugs Bunny. And 2 seconds later, it gave me like a 5-paragraph essay where it talked about this and it used the Bugs Bunny voice and it actually had some really nuanced points about like, well, it's all about relativism and screwing with expectations, kind of like when I dress up like a lady duck, right? And it's like that's actually a pretty nuanced point, combining Looney Tunes and like art theory, but and it created it in like 2.5 seconds. I could have not done that in 2.5 seconds. And it's because I'm not using math to come up with the words I say, I'm using reasoning. But there's also limitations on that because, right, it's not actually doing reasoning. And so if you give it tasks that rely on that, it's still only doing math. And sometimes it can approximate reasoning and sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, that's one of the things I talk about quite a bit in when I talk about this subject, is that it really is all mathematical underneath the hood.
Very interesting, and math is not my best subject. So I was just going to ask you, I don't know how active you are on LinkedIn, but would it be okay to drop your LinkedIn in the chat so if people want to go
Yeah,
follow you? Okay,
absolutely. I can do that.
Oh, thank you. That would be great. I was going to have, I think it's already there.
Oh, perfect. Wonderful. Thank you.
We have this superstar behind us, Sandy, who
Ah,
takes care of
wonderful.
all the link dropping and then Ross kind of followed up with a comment, and I'm not sure if when this comment came, you must have been talking about something, right? The comment came before this. Ross says, the world is not static. Things always change over time. That might have been when you were talking about the skills and things.
Yeah.
Need. And now Ross has followed up with GPT models are extremely formulaic. Their development has possibly brought a new meaning to the term of formulaic languages. What do you think about that?
Not sure exactly what you're getting at, Ross, but what I'm sort of thinking about when I hear you say that is the ways that we, once you sort of have a mathematical representation or a numerical representation of language, it can actually do new things, and it can not only describe, but it can predict and it can create. And that's really fundamentally what generative AI means. But could that be taken to a new level? And can we, what you said, formulated language, I was actually thinking about, created languages, right? Esperanto and others, right?
So I think maybe I misspoke. He said formulaic.
Ah, I see. Okay. Yeah, I think there's lots of really cool ways that these technologies are able to change expectations around how we approach, how we research language, how we understand it, how we use it. And I think there's a lot to cover there. I know I don't really have time to get into all
No,
of
we
it,
actually have
but
maybe 45 seconds left.
yeah, exactly.
Well, let me share a couple comments that just came up here at the end, and then we'll move on to closing up here. So Dr. Gus says, an inspiring talk in multiple ways. Thank you, Kate, for sharing your journey. Your experiences are enlightening to our students who are thinking and planning about their future careers. And I highly agree with that statement. Libby, you asked such great questions that got her to really focus on the journey, and all of the students are going to be on that journey if they're not already on that journey. And then Sarah says, thank you so much for making the time for this agile conversation, Kate. And actually, Sarah's graduating with a linguistics degree, bachelor's in linguistics this fall. So congratulations, Sarah. It's nice to see you here.
Congrats.
And yes, Yes, yes. And Autumn says, thank you for your time. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. Libby, you did a great job interviewing Kate, and Kate, you did a great job answering the questions. We really enjoyed your conversation. We could have gone another hour if we had it, I think. So this concludes our code series event. We do have a data scientist, if you want to join us again, Libby and Kate, on the 28th, I believe. It's on the code series website. It's an evening event, 7 p.m. So I hope all of you who were here tonight will maybe come throw some linguistics questions at him.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me, Lisa. It was always great to come back and talk with folks, here at UNT, and, really appreciate it. And I think thank you for whoever dropped my LinkedIn in the chat. If
That was
anyone
Sandy.
does want to connect, I'm happy to do so. So feel free to reach out.